what I want to talk about today is how do you develop a good business model? And there are a lot of ways to approach a subject like this, and there's some that are really mechanical or get into the nuances of how to build a business plan. And I don't want to take that approach, but I think it's really important for if I think back to when I was sitting in your shoes and going to lectures like this, it was really helpful for me to understand that you're going to get little bits of really great advice, but it's some of it's not going to apply to you. The reality is that certain entrepreneurs have certain styles, certain entrepreneurs have certain methods that will work really well for certain industries, work really well for certain specific startups and certain specific timings of when that startup's growing at certain parts of their growth rate. And it won't work for others. And so this is really my perspective, but with a lot of these talks you're going to get, it's just one perspective. I think Clint could definitely agree with that everyone has very different styles, and different styles work for different industries and for different entrepreneurs and for different teams. So this is how I view it. Let's see if this clicker works here. All right. Let's see here. Looks like it turned on. Now, what computer are we using here?
All right, now you're talking.
All right, thank you. Okay, so here are a bunch of things that are out there, whether it's Entrepreneur Magazine, Inc., you name it. Everyone, Harvard Business Review has these many different versions that come out over the years of methods of doing and developing business models. This is not what I'm going to talk about today. Although this is really relevant and will break down some of the specific steps you might want to take and some of the minutia of building a business model, even though it could be important, I want to talk about the steps before this. I want to talk about more of the foundational steps. And so when you get into the minutia, it's kind of can get overloading of all these different steps that you have to do a business model. I would say set all of that aside for a minute and think about where the real foundation comes from. And for me, in my experience and what I've seen, truly great business models come from real and deep empathy. Now, this may seem odd because it seems, for lack of a better word, fluffy. It seems not as hardcore business as you might think. But I would argue strongly that it's actually one of the most important and the key elements to how you actually get a business model that will, once you get to all the tactics that are in the previous slides that I just showed, it'll actually allow those tactics to work in the long term. And the second part is that those business models are sustained and protected by genuine happiness. Now it seems like I took even another step further into the fluffy side, but I'll get to where that happiness comes from and why that's important when you're building and scaling a business. So on the empathy side, for us, and I'll talk a little bit about MX's journey and my journey at MX, and how we looked at the industry and how we looked at how we wanted to tackle it. So I'll focus on empathy first for the actual consumer. So when we looked at personal financial management, we realized that if you look at finances, and I have a chart that I don't actually have on one of these slides that shows all the industries, and it has banking and diversified financials as the two largest industries by a combination of measuring assets under management, measuring profitability, sales, revenue, and measuring assets. Assets under management, profitability, and market cap. And so it's juxtaposed to oil and gas, it's juxtaposed to healthcare, and they pale in comparison to the actual size of the banking industry and diversified financials. So it's a huge, huge industry. And when we look at it, we're like, okay, we get that. So it's a giant industry, huge amounts of money. If we solved a problem, that would be meaningful. But let's set that completely aside. What are the things that plague individuals? What are the things that plague mankind? And we have the intangibles that mean the most to us. Family, right? Family, being happy, being healthy, all those types of things. But some of the foundational things support for that are things like finances and healthcare. If you don't have good finances and you don't have good health care, once your health starts to go sideways, I had a friend recently who was diagnosed with cancer, and is luckily winning that battle right now, and looks like he's on a great path to completely win that battle. But as I've watched him go through that battle, once you are given a timeline where you have a certain number of months that they expect you to live, it changes everything. So all of a sudden, all of the things that you enjoy and love in this life that are the intangibles, you don't get to enjoy if you don't have great health and if you don't have a length to your life. On the financial side, it's the same thing. So if you don't have really strong finances or you don't have financial flexibility, all of a sudden it starts to cause huge stress in marriages and things like that. We've all seen the stats that 35% of all marriages list their biggest stress as finances. Divorces are listed, I think it's like 40 to 50% of divorces list financial stress and strain as one of the biggest reasons that cause it. Lack of time with family and your children and all those types of things, the stresses of life are directly correlated to financials. So when we look at this, it's like, okay, well, we've got a lot of things that have been solved in this world. I love the fact that I can have a friend traveling on the other side of the world, post a picture, tag somebody in it, and I can see that and comment on it in real time with everybody else all over the world. That's really cool technology. But when we look at healthcare and we look at finances, it's just crazy. It's just ancient. To not be able to see where all of your records are in one place on the healthcare side, to not be able to know where all of your finances are and what trajectory you're on is a pretty sad state. So when we look at this one, these are two accounts, and so I want to give some perspective here. You've got account number one, account number two. Look at them really quickly, and which one of those is in severe trouble and which one is doing fine? Point left or right if you have an answer. Okay, I got this direction, I got one this direction, got this direction, got another that direction. Okay, so we're literally having about split in people who've answered as far as left or right. This is the way that a current user experiences their finances through the best method that was available prior to MX, and this is Mint. This is Mint.com. These are screenshots from Mint.com. They have exactly the same budgets. They just spent money differently. There's different transactions on each one of those. So when you look at this interface, if you can't quickly see whether or not you're in serious trouble or not, then we have a broken interface. And so if you're expecting a user to get on top of their financial life, but you provided an interface that is hard to understand or is demotivating, we're doing a great disservice to that user. So I'm going to show you how we solve this problem. This is actually a patented approach that we use as one of our many patented interfaces, although interfaces is a small section of what we do compared to our platform and the data analytics and the data that we do, the data cleansing that we do. But I'm going to show you a different interface and tell me how quickly it is for you to be able to immediately tell which one's on and which one's off, who's in trouble and who's not. It's immediately apparent, isn't it? And what's interesting is that you can show this to a 5-year-old. With you can show it to a child who barely can speak and say which one is good, which one's bad, and they're like that one. I'm like, well, why is it bad? And it's like because those big red marks. And so the ability for a human to immediately, with no mental processing, be able to understand it is very clear. So this comes from empathy. Let me tell you the actual conversations that we had around this. When we looked at this interface, I said, imagine somebody who is coming home from working their second shift, they're exhausted, or they're coming home from working some big corporate job even or whatever, and they're tired, and the last thing they want to do is dig into their finances. They don't want to bust open a spreadsheet. They just need to know, am I okay? Am I off track? And then you provide an interface like this to them that literally just gives them a headache and makes them have to sit there and crunch up numbers. When I show this to CEOs of banks, and we're talking $100 billion, $2.4 trillion banks, and I showed them this interface, they have to lower their glasses, most of them have glasses, and they lean forward and they're like looking at this, looking at this, looking at this, and eventually once they've added up all the numbers, they actually usually choose the right answer. Surprisingly, sometimes not. But it's quite a bit of pain. Let's look at another example. This is trends right here. This is an interface to show someone over time where their finances are going. So they can look at each section and hover over it and say, this is where your food spending is going. This is where your housing or your rent is going. These types of interfaces allow a user really quickly to see anomalies, spikes in spending. What happened there? Can they change that? Can they curtail that? My wife and I are very blessed to not have to stress too much about finances, but we still try to be responsible because we want our money to go towards the things that matter to us. And so when we review our finances, we were just doing it this last weekend, and as we're going through certain things, we're looking at, it's very easy as you drill into this interface to be able to see that we were double spending on Netflix. I don't know how that happened. Somehow we had 2 Netflix accounts from like a year ago or something like that. And as we're looking through things in detail, which we haven't done in about a year, we look at the general stuff of are we okay? So we know where our flows are going, but we're diving in that next level. and it's giving us all this data back. We also got new snow tires on one of the cars, and getting new tires and snow tires on certain cars is very expensive, and we've been double charged. And we didn't even realize that. They charged us once, and then a few days later they charged us again. And so what happens is all these things start to come out of like, hey, we don't really use that anymore. We don't use that subscription anymore, and it helps us kind of fine tune our finances. For the average American, when you really look at what an average American makes, when you look at what an average American has in debt, this changes this entire trajectory of where they are financially. These things matter significantly for them. And so you can see on here the ability to do things like manage cash flow, investments, and goals for retirement and things like that. So we had great empathy towards these users, but we realized if we didn't help, how could we help users at scale? And we saw things like Mint, and Mint had 10 million, 12 million users at the time, only a small percentage of which were active. And so we said, well, how can we affect users at a huge scale? And we looked at some of the big banks. You gotta remember, some of these big banks, they have 30 plus million users per bank. And we have thousands and thousands of banks in the United States. So when we looked at that, we thought, well, how could we actually have a bank that's already delivering mobile banking or online banking be able to turn this feature on, take much better care, that help them be empathetic and caring about the customers they want to care about, they just don't have the right technology. How could we empower that? And so we went to the banks and the credit unions and we said, would you want something like this? And the answer was yes. We would love a solution like this, but we don't have the technology and it'd probably be too hard to integrate. So we designed a platform and a really easy way to integrate it into the bank. And we were super empathetic in that to think, what's it like to be a bank who's busy, worried about all these other things, and you want to do the right thing, you want to provide these great things, but you need it to be easy. So we started, in the same way we were empathetic to the users, we started being really empathetic to what it's like to be a bank and how could we help them and help them be successful. And we realized that banks don't write a lot of their own software. So the banks have to rely on software providers, and there's this huge industry of companies that are $30 billion, like a Fiserv or an FIS and things like that. And these large companies service and they create the online banking. So when you log into your credit union or your local bank, it's actually not that bank or credit union who made that online banking or mobile banking. It's another software provider. So we had to be empathetic to the industry and the software providers as well. Now what that did for us is we now were helping them solve problems that they were stressed about but they didn't have time to solve, they knew they wanted to get to eventually, and we made that much easier for them. And we had to really put ourselves in their shoes. We had to think like they would think. We had to feel the pressures that they would feel. Now what that resulted in, as you can see here, this is the entire, this pie chart over here is the entire market of online banking providers by size or impact in the industry. 60% of that market right now buys from us and integrates with MX. And so we've essentially have, when you have 60% of a market, you're right at the space of almost having a monopolistic type control over that. Now with that takes great responsibility and great burden to make sure you deliver for that space. But if you see here, in 2011, the company was founded in 2010, we had 10 online banking providers, and then by 2012 we had 25, and then 2014 we had 35. But you can see that we started with the small ones and we started rapidly moving towards the really large ones. And now the largest online banking providers that service all these banks are working with us. So by being empathetic all the way up the chain, we had this really great solution that we knew that banks wanted, and now that banks wanted it, it was a really great solution that we knew the software providers wanted. We were able to integrate into a small set of 55 online banking providers, be able to provide services to about 12,000 banks and credit unions, which provide services to 300 plus million Americans, right? And that's how we were able to navigate that. But it couldn't have occurred if we weren't focused on empathy. So what did that result in? It's kind of cool animation. So this shows you our first about 4 years. This is in our 4th year of business. So you see the company founded in 2010, and then you can see revenue rapidly growing. And this is 2 years old, but you can see where we ended by the end of that 4th, 5th year. And so with a really good plan that's based on empathy, you can get some really great results. So the second thing that I said was, how is that business model sustained and protected by happiness? And I get that seems fluffy, but it is so, so important. So everyone knows the big stats, and there's 20 different ways to slice it, but this is just one of them. 95% of startups fail. Clint, you've seen some great ones succeed, but you've seen quite a few crash and burn. We've all observed in Utah, and it's tough because there's some great companies and some great ideas. There's also some companies that aren't great and not some great ideas, but it's a struggle. And even with a great idea and a lot of drive, it's really, really hard, and you're gonna hit these moments. And in this lecture series, there's a lot of other entrepreneurs that can speak about it that have been very successful. Josh James is one. He shares his story about times that he was really distraught as he's trying to navigate his company to a good outcome. And obviously it ended really well, but there were definitely some dark days along that path. You have to expect that. And so with that, the mission matters.
The systemic problems facing society today can seem hopeless. Broken healthcare, starvation, poverty, energy crises, and rising debt. Who's going to bend the arc of history? Those who are driven to do so. History has proven that people who have a vision, a dream, the drive to do what's right in the face of all the skeptics, naysayers, and doubters are those who overcome the impossible. They create solutions that make life easier to manage. They make their mark on the world and leave it better than it was when they arrived. The reality is, change is inevitable. At MX, we're driven to make our mark and bring about positive change. We believe we have a moral imperative to move mankind forward. And we know the fastest route to progress is to leverage the existing structure. That's why we partner with the world's most innovative financial institutions and fintech companies to most effectively bring financial freedom to the lives of millions of people. We do this by providing world-class solutions that are engaging, powerful, and easy to use, enabling financial institutions to become obsessed with consumer advocacy, relationships, and improving the financial habits of their account holders. We know that if humanity solves individual financial problems, it will in turn help families, communities, and nations. At MX, we're doing our part to resolve the systemic problems facing society today. Be part of the solution.
So this is actually an internal video that we make for our own team to talk about our culture. But I wanted to share it with you today because it ties in and it lets you really see in a really powerful way that we really care about what we're doing. The people who are there are focused on the mission. We talk a lot about resonance, and we talk about resonance when we're interviewing team members or seeing if we've got the right fit. And if you guys know how a tuning fork works, you strike a tuning fork and you can have another one that you didn't strike, but you move the two close together. And if they have resonance, if they operate the same frequency, the other one will immediately start moving just by getting close to each other. And that's how we do interviews. When you come in and you see the right person who gets it, who wants to change the world in the same way that you want to change the world, they just start to get passionate and excited, and you start to feel just like resonance and then that vibration between tuning forks. There's that vibration and energy around, this is so cool, we could do this and we could do this and this would change this, and it starts this snowball of just this really powerful conversation. And so when you look at that, that's where this happiness comes from. And when you're intensely building, this is a 60-foot digital wall in our office. It's a curved wall that in our engineering area that monitors every aspect of our server. So we have one of those powerful platforms in fintech, and that's the platform that I was referring. We got this great UI, but it's really the data and the platform is what we really focus on, and where our real value is at MX that we provide to the industry and to the financial institutions and to the end users. But this is a really serious mission. But how do we, when we're tackling this, there's really tough parts, there's really hard parts, and you have to make sure that because people resonate with the mission, when you're tackling something serious, you have this lighthearted happiness that lets you get through these really tough times. Because there are times when you're exhausted and beat. Let me give you an example. Last night, I was at the office. We had team members there till well past 2:30. This is actually a picture that I took. You can see that digital wall in the background. We had one of our clients that they were having issues with their platform. So imagine we have 1,100 banks and credit unions that we service. 1,100 banks and credit unions that we power. So one of these credit unions just turned a whole bunch of users live on their platform. And when they turned it live, their platform was having issues keeping up with our platform and how we were moving data between our platforms. And they were having this issue, and users were experiencing issues. And on this chart, that one of the walls in the background, we're watching thousands and thousands of users trying to connect in and use these financial apps to manage their finances, and we're watching their connections die because of this other platform having issues. So this is around a little bit before 2 in the morning, and we're there diagnosing with their teams and other third-party teams that are all on these conference calls, phones, doing screen sharing, helping them diagnose it. We help them find it. We actually are the ones who found it, and we help them fix it and resolve it. Got a temporary fix up, and then we're helping them resolve it long term. But what's funny, and this picture shows everybody focused in a serious way, but a few minutes before this and a few minutes after that, everybody was just laughing and having a great time. It's 2 in the morning. It already was a super long day, and it was exhausting. But we were like saving thousands of people, connecting into their finances, and it's exciting, and we believe in what we're doing. And so what's interesting about startups and the ability to protect that is if you're happy about it because you believe in the mission, you will enjoy and thrive in even the toughest and hardest times. So I want to show 3 final pictures that I think illustrate, because these are things that I am not that interested in. I find gardens beautiful. I think they're very beautiful. I would never take the time to make a garden look like that. I personally, you'll never catch me out in my yard manicuring, stuff like that. The people who did this, they love gardening, right? I'm never going to be able to compete with somebody who's going to deliver great gardens to the world, right? So I shouldn't pick that battle. It's not my love. I'm not passionate about it, and it doesn't make me happy every moment that I'm doing it. You know the person who made that garden, even as it gets late into the evening, they're out there just trimming and clipping and things like that and just loving every bit of it. Sad that they have to break away to go eat dinner, kind of a thing. Here's 2 more examples of things that I relate to even less. These are popsicle stick kind of creations. I should never go into a popsicle stick business. I'm using these as metaphors, right? Obviously, there's not a popsicle stick business. Maybe there is out there. This person, their passion and their love for this is going to trump me all day long. This person, that's from Lord of the Rings apparently, will trump anyone, any day in that one area. You need to find something that you feel so passionate about, that you love so much, that you can have so much empathy for, that you will be a fierce competitor, because others will not be able to love that or care about it or pour their soul into it the way that you will. If you do that, and then you have empathy for the people that you're trying to solve this problem for, and you're passionate and happy about it, you will protect your business model. You will find ways to work through all that minutia that I showed you at the beginning, and all those details of, well, we got to figure out exactly where our revenue is coming from, where our customers, and how all these things tie together. That will come to you if you have as a foundation empathy and your love for the business. So breaking it down to 4 kind of final points to leave you with. Find something you feel great empathy about. You truly feel the pain of the people that you're going to help solve this problem for. Lean towards problems that a lot of people are affected by, and that those people feel it severely. Because if you can't achieve scale, you're not going to get as much money flowing into the business that's going to let you be able to fund the business to solve it in a really powerful way. Use that empathy to find real solutions to that painful problem. And the real solutions, I showed you some examples that MX used earlier. Make sure you are choosing something that you love and feel that it is critical to be solved, so that you will find true happiness in it, and that will sustain you through the inevitable hard times. So, in your own way, move the world forward, bit by bit, startup by startup. I would love to see out of this group some great startups come in the years to come. Good luck, and have a great time getting through the rest of college.
Okay, now we get to let you ask questions. Clint's going to handle this side of the room, and I'll be on this side. Make sure that, oh, darn it, this side's already going. Go ahead.
Could I by chance get a water?
Yeah,
Is there water around?
we'll track one down.
Yeah, I think it's maybe up there on the top.
Okay, we'll grab it.
Yeah.
All right, question.
You ready? Okay. So going into fintech, obviously you guys were a disruptor, taking on some large companies. How did you break through those barriers as a startup to move your way into that sector?
So there's so many great analogies for this that probably say it a lot better than I could. There's the examples of like the steel industry, and there's whole books written about this, where the entrants came in at the low end, at the rebar, and then worked their way up. If you looked at that one chart that we have, it showed that we started with the smallest online banking providers. We started with the smallest banks and credit unions and worked our way up. That enabled us to deliver a really compelling solution for financial institutions and for online banking providers that didn't have 20 different providers already coming to them. Now, we came up with a very unique solution, but even with a really unique solution and a great idea, bringing that into an existing market that's highly competitive, there's so much relationships and long sales cycles because the numbers, the dollars are so big that you can, even with a better solution, a better mousetrap, a 10 times better mousetrap, you can still sometimes be drowned out. Now, with a really unique, patent-protected, whatever mousetrap, maybe you can break in on that side, but your risk is much higher. And because we wanted to control our own destiny and be very methodical about it, we weren't opposed to taking the first few years of the business, growing a little bit slower, although it ended up turning into very rapid growth, but being able to tackle the smaller end of the market with a solution that we could bring exactly how we wanted. When you sell to a larger client that will pay you more dollars, they're more susceptible to them saying, yeah, but I want it customized this way and this way and this way. Even if you're like, yeah, but that'll make it worse, right? And if you see great products don't bend to the whim of what a market might say in a fleeting moment or what a customer might say in a fleeting moment. One of the best examples is the famous, if you had asked customers what they wanted from a phone, right, you wouldn't have gotten an iPhone because no customer was saying, yeah, I want to tap on glass. Every customer was saying, oh, it's the worst experience. I couldn't imagine that. That'd be horrible. Well, don't you want a large screen? Well, yes, but I want a keyboard, right? I want it like my BlackBerry. And so it took somebody saying, but we could do this right, and we know we could do this right, so we're going to make this change. Another great example is Facebook. When Facebook changed to the feed, right, there was the uproar. I mean, if you go back and really Google it and you look at how many people were saying, we're leaving Facebook, you can't believe they did this, we hate it, it's a horrible change. Now everyone loves it. Can't imagine. I mean, what would Facebook even be like if you didn't have that? It's weird to imagine what it was like before. But they had to make the change, weather the storm of people being frustrated for a while, and then the people saying, oh my gosh, we love this, right? And that's what each one of these innovators had to do. You can't do that if you're selling to a really big client that's used to getting their way. You got to sell to the small end of the market, prove out that your methods and your products are right, and then move up, unless you're an existing company like an Apple, right? But if you're a startup, you can't do that.
Is it on? Okay. People often say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Can you explain a little bit of that for me, Ryan?
Well, yes, because so culture dictates strategy. You have to remember that the strategy is built by the team, and strategy comes in a bunch of levels. So you have the highest level strategy, which is set by the CEO, founder, executive team, co-founder. So like myself and co-founder Brandon DeWitt, we do a huge amount of the strategy of where we're heading. He actually had a company, I had a company, and we ended up merging the two efforts. We acquired his company, but it essentially was a merging of those two companies. So there's strategy that's set at that level, but what really makes a company great is all the levels below on how it gets executed, and the team resonating and feeding back into that strategy, verifying it, tweaking it, adjusting it to make sure that you can navigate that path well. If you don't have a really good culture that attracts great, brilliant, hard-driving people, the people who will sacrifice a lot to make a difference but won't deal with the bureaucracy or the negatives of a lot of companies that are out there, then you can't bring in the people that help refine and make that strategy great. So it's one of those things where if you focus entirely on strategy and let culture slip, then your strategy is going to go off course, and it's going to be negative, and it won't be shored up. If you focus on culture, while you're also focusing on strategy, but make sure the culture is a really high priority, then that culture will be this never-ending spring of innovation and tweaks and adjustments that refine and make sure that strategy is solid. Good question.
My question is, so, watching your presentation, it looks like your business, your MX business has really taken over the market. Like you said, it's had like 60% of banks and stuff like that. So my question is, how, now that you have kind of a monopoly over the banks and stuff like that, do you feel like you are continually innovative with your designs and how you do business, or do you feel like you stick with a lot of the same things you did to get where you're at now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Just for perfect clarification, so the 60% are the software providers. So 60% of the companies that service online banking and things like that for financial institutions, banks, and credit unions, that's the market that we have the majority of, the by far majority of. Now with that, there's still flexibility. So although we have the strongest presence, it's not really a monopoly because they have the free choice to go wherever they would want to go, and there's plenty of other choices out there. We just happen to be the best choice currently. Now, we want to maintain that lead. So if we're in first place and we're a mile ahead of the next competitor, we want to make it 1.5 miles next year and 2 miles the next year. So our job is to keep innovating as rapidly as possible to grow that distance between us and our next closest competitor. Now, that's healthy. We like it when a competitor actually starts to aggressively catch up. It's weird because we like it, but we don't like it, right? Because obviously you want to stay as far ahead as possible, but we want the space to innovate. And that's where it gets back to caring about the right things. It's more important that the space innovates than any one company wins. Now we intend to win because we're going to drive hard and we want to deliver the best value for the industry. But that's part of what keeps that original fire that you're asking. Has that changed or has that died? Not at all. It's accelerated. Part of it is because we feel the feedback of it working. We can feel the momentum and the excitement. When you're seeing for the last few months, we saw credit cards move for the first time where people who were being charged these abhorrent, 25, 28% interest rates, and we were able to identify them and all the data and help the financial institutions move them away from a competitor who is abusing them to where they would only charge them 6% or whatever for a credit card. If you're an average American and you're carrying a $30,000 balance, being able to know that that's available and be able to see that almost in real time and adjust that can really have a huge impact on your personal finances. As we see that, it accelerates our drive and our desire to be able to innovate faster. So I would say, if anything, it's picked up.
Hi. So I have a question. I have a couple actually. One, is this only available to businesses, or do you have an app like Mint? And then two, have you considered other businesses to support this business or to continue? I don't know. Have you thought of creating other businesses now that you're at this level?
So the first question, so we service 1,100 banks and credit unions. Now, we're a platform, so they can consume an entire different varying degree of what they consume of us, right? So just like Salesforce is a platform and other companies like that are a platform, people can integrate it very significantly or in a very light way, so they can consume a small bit of it. So for those that consume it really heavily, you get this really cool mobile experience, this rich experience. One of the financial institutions locally that we'll be launching with it soon in the next few weeks or months is America First Credit Union. So America First Credit Union is one. There are other financial credit unions here as well. Mountain America, UCCU will be launching soon. So I would say all the major credit unions in the state, the larger banks in the state are either in conversations or plan to go live soon as well. And so as you kind of looked for different solutions, you'll see Mountain America's done some great ads that show the bubble budgets. I see a lot of heads shaking who've seen those ads. So you'll see credit unions and banks go live with this. Our goal is just to provide great solutions and let the banks and credit unions thrive in and of themselves and help users that way. So there'll be ways to consume it. Now the second question, I didn't quite understand.
Well, obviously you have a very successful business and you're doing really well. Have you thought about doing anything else besides this, or doing anything to maybe complement this business to get even more money or empathize with other people?
So yeah, let me answer this one really directly because I think this is really important from my perspective. And again, you'll get different advice and it works differently for different people. I know entrepreneurs who will run multiple companies at a time. I will never do that. When I say never, there could be a very rare circumstance where I would do that, but it would be very rare. For one, I have an immense amount of loyalty to my team, and I owe it to my team for me to be fully committed to this startup until it has completed its mission. Now, its mission will go for years and years and years and years and years, but the innovation from a flip phone, a Nokia, or whatever, the flip phone, to an iPhone was massive. And then you have some innovation beyond that. But once the industry had fully changed over, where no one's buying flip phones and everyone has a smartphone, the big leap has been made. Now you hope there's a next innovation, right? But with this, until we actually see the majority of Americans in the world having crystal clear views of their finances and knowing that they're on track so they're not stressed about it, then we haven't really completed a big chunk of our mission. And so where exactly is that line and what would that look like, I don't know. But if we find anything that will help or amplify that, we would do it within MX, not as a separate startup. I would expect that of my team, and I believe they would expect the same out of me.
And it seems like this is your passion. I mean, this is really what you love.
Yeah, and I have other passions. Like, I'm really passionate about energy. I think tokamak reactors and stellarators and helium-3 infusion, I'm just like fascinated by. We have to make energy cheaper. We have to figure out protein bending and genetics and things like that. So there are other things that I care deeply about, but I'm a big believer in focusing on what you're doing right now, doing it incredibly well, making sure that succeeds, lands well, and then depending on timing and how that goes, potentially move on to the next thing, but only once the success is fully secured and that company's done well.
So let me ask a real fundamental kind of question of why do you even need a business model? I mean, why even spend the time with putting together a business model to begin with?
Because you need clarity about what you're going to do. I mean, you could say that certain people at a very small scale, you can wing it. But at a large scale, as you start to get team members coming in, having clarity around the things that seem fluffy at first, exactly what is your mission, exactly what is your vision, what is your mission, what's the strategy, and how are you going to execute on that and all the intricacies of that. It's critical to have that be very clear so the whole team can resonate with it and be able to execute to it.
Cool. And did the business model that you developed, was that helpful in attracting investors or partners in the early
It's
days?
critical. You can't, in my opinion, you can't get past the first few phases of investors, quality of investors and size of investors, if you don't have a really clear and compelling business model, vision, mission, strategy, business model. The entire gamut has to be very clear and compelling.
And were there tools that helped you develop your business model, or were there mentors, or how do you get over the hump there of how to figure that out?
I mean, I think part of it is just elbow grease. I mean, you got to dive in. There's endless amounts of resources. I showed in one of the early slides all these different places you can go for their unique perspective on the 8 steps, 10 steps, 6 steps you need to do to build a business model. But I would argue that get this foundation right first, and once you have that really clear, then go into the specific steps. But I would look at all the different ones that are out there and merge together the ones that work for you.
Cool. All right, everybody. Let's hear it for Ryan. Wasn't that awesome?